Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Alberta NDP is calling for a full investigation following news that Premier Daniel Smith is being investigated by the Ethics Commissioner. We hear from political reporter Brian Lilly, who offers his thoughts if the Ethics Commissioner's investigation will hurt the UCP's chances of being re-elected. And federal Tory leader Pierre Poilievre took a shot at a Liberal MP mocking his concern over Bill C-11.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba have signed a major agreement to collaborate on economic corridor projects to help boost trade and economic growth for Western Canada. The Alberta government made the announcement on Tuesday afternoon. Officials say the Memorandum of Understanding between the provinces will strengthen our region as a key player in the global market.
Western Canada has long been a robust economic engine in Canada and is an established world leader in many critical economic sectors, with extensive natural resources from agriculture to forestry to energy to petrochemicals to minerals, as well as manufactured goods. Alberta and Manitoba and Saskatchewan have the products that the world needs. And all three provinces rely on strong and efficient economic corridors to get these products to market within Canada and beyond.
Alberta's NDP Justice critic is calling for a full independent investigation following news that Premier Smith is under investigation by the Ethics Commissioner. Calgary MLA Irfan Sabir says the ethics investigation is simply not enough. He says Smith's actions are a clear violation of the rule of law and she should be held accountable. Smith revealed the commissioner is investigating whether she interfered in the administration of justice in relation to a COVID-19 prosecution.
I think it's a deeply concerning issue. At stake is the independence of our judicial system. At stake is our democracy. So Albertans are certainly concerned. Many Albertans have weighed in on this, and I think only thing that can restore Albertan trust and faith in independence of their judicial system is an independent investigation. That's why we have been calling for one, and if Danielle Smith has nothing to hide, she should commit to one today.
The Premier's office has said Smith welcomes the investigation and will cooperate while being confident that it will determine she's done absolutely nothing wrong. Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly gave us his thoughts if he thinks the investigation by the Ethics Commissioner will hurt the UCP's chances of being re-elected.
The big question for Smith and the UCP is, how does this hurt them in Calgary? Does it motivate voters who were on the fence? Does it motivate the NDP base to turn out for Rachel Notley? If that happens, then it hurts her. But, the counter to that is that Daniel Smith and the UCP have to make sure that they win Battleground Calgary by whatever means possible. So they've got to find something to counter any negativity from this narrative around the ethics investigation, and they've got to make sure they get out their vote.
Mr. Lilly will also chat about how Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, is set to testify later this week on allegations of China's election interference. Watch that full Q&A coming up later in our program. Workers at the Canada Revenue Agency have voted in favour of striking on Friday ahead of mediation talks which are scheduled to take place later this month. The union, which represents around 35,000 CRA workers, said members voted overwhelmingly for strike action and will be in a legal strike position on April the 14th. The union is seeking wage increases, more flexibility on remote work, along with improved work and job security and work-life balance. Union members have not had a contract since October 31st of 2021. Officials say a strike could disrupt tax filing. The deadline to file taxes is May the 1st. CRA and the union agreed to hold mediation talks April 17th through the 20th. The Alberta government offered an update today as to how many groups have benefited from the $20 million that was dished out last fall to support food banks and food security organizations. Officials say to date, $10 million of that funding has been distributed to 210 organizations which help provide food for needy Albertans. Social Services Minister Jason Nixon says of the money provided, more than $3.4 million has been used to match donations made to food security organizations. All of the 113 groups that applied for the donation matching grant were provided with funding. Government officials say in addition to the grant streams, the province is also providing $510,000 to Food Banks Alberta to help strengthen the food bank network in the province. Well, you know, it's almost time for farmers to head out to begin their spring seeding. Dave Bishop is the director of the Alberta Wheat Commission, and he also farms near Barons, Alberta. He outlined what the upcoming spring seeding season is going to look like for him.
We'll have our usual pulses, oil seeds, and cereals, and a little bit of forage. We're not changing our rotation. It's staying the same. As far as getting organized, it's still a little damp, which is nice. It's different than the last couple of years where it's been pretty dry when we've gotten into spring. Mind you, the wind's been blowing the last couple of days, so we'll wait in a couple of weeks and see what the conditions are like. So probably 2 weeks away from seeding. We're slowly getting all our equipment ready and so forth, making sure it's all ready to go. And so like today, you know, not much wind today, really warm. It's kind of a beautiful day to be outside working, I'll be honest. It's really nice.
According to Bishop, seeding for most farmers starts in late spring or even in the early summer. Lethbridge and the greater Alberta area is home to some of the most picturesque landscapes in Canada, and it's about to be shown off in a very big way. TELUS is launching a new program called Love from the West, which will take place from April the 11th through May 12th. It's asking Albertans to showcase scenic areas they call home for a chance at winning some cash prizes. Video journalist Micah Quinn talked with TELUS representatives about this fun new initiative.
Our campaign, and the contest in particular, is really the opportunity for Western Canadians to be able to tell us their experience and their love for the West, and be an inclusive story that everyone can tell together.
When you think of some of the nicest natural landscapes in the West, places like Waterton Lakes National Park, Banff National Park, and Riding on Stone Provincial Park might spring to mind. Here in Lethbridge, we have the Nika-Yuko Japanese Garden, the Coulees, and Henderson Lake, just to name a few. Outdoor lovers in Western Canada and Lethbridge are being encouraged to share a photo, video, or written note of their favorite spot on their Facebook or Instagram profile and hashtag Love from the West and use the TELUS tag.
And the idea is that we can then use that later in a lot of our material, just kind of a shared experience around Western Canadians in general.
Once the contest wraps up, 2 winners, one from BC and one from Alberta, will win $2,500 to give to a local charity, along with an additional $2,500 for a trip to explore any of the beautiful scenery within the 2 provinces.
And in addition to that, they also actually get a Samsung Smart TV.
According to staff from TELUS, since 2000, the company, along with its team members and retirees, have generated more than $1.27 million in cash contributions and volunteered more than 75,000 hours in support of charities and community organizations in Lethbridge. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The National Citizens Inquiry into the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic will open 3 days of hearings in Winnipeg on Thursday. Some of the expert witnesses include Natalie Gordon, who's a geneticist and epidemiologist, Stephen Theriot, who's a medical microbiologist, Edmonton Police Officer Staff Sergeant Rick Abbott, and medical researcher Deanne McLeod. The hearings will then move to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan from April 20th through the 22nd, and then Red Deer, Alberta, April 26th through the 28th. Organizers say future hearings will also be held in Vancouver, Ottawa, and in Quebec. The first 6 days of hearings were held in Nova Scotia and Toronto. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre took a shot at the Trudeau government's Bill C-11, which he says is all about controlling what Canadians see and share on the internet. A Liberal MP from Winnipeg North suggested the Tories were thinking that the government was concerned about Canadians uploading cat videos on social media.
Does he believe, as the leader of the Conservative Party, that it's the government, the Bloc, the NDP, and the Green Party trying to prevent individuals from uploading cat videos on Facebook?
Do I believe that the government wants to limit people into putting cat videos online? Of course not. But his question is very, very telling. Because first of all, it is designed, as everything that this government says, to make the people feel small, to tell them that they're really only concerned about cat videos. Mr. Speaker, the people of Canada are smarter than that. They're not idiots. Yes. The people of Canada, they post poetry online, they post music, they post beautiful stories, they share their most beautiful moments online. To distill that all down to cat videos is once again an insult by a liberal snob on the common people.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, meanwhile, is on a cross-Canada tour highlighting his party's role in securing certain investments in the recent federal budget. That includes expanded dental coverage for low-income Canadians.
We've expanded dental care for the first time in our history as a nation to include seniors, people living with disabilities, and children 18 and under. This is a historic expansion, and it's going to save families on average $1,200 a year. For some families, it can mean a lot more. I met with a senior couple. Both of them are on a fixed income. Both of them need dental care that's going to cost, they were quoted, over $1,100 each for a root canal, which they cannot put off because of the pain that they're in. For that family, they're going to save $2,200. So this is a real way to save money for people. It's also going to improve people's health, save them money and save them from the pain of having to live with a painful condition in their mouth because they can't afford dental care.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his Ukrainian counterpart, Denis Shmyhal, chatted with the media prior to meeting on Tuesday. Ukraine is seeking additional military aid for a spring counteroffensive against Russian invading forces.
Canada, as you know, is a true and steadfast friend to Ukraine. We will continue to be there with whatever it takes, as long as it takes. The opportunity now to sit down with you and to hear directly how we can best help. And also how we can work together on the international stage to make sure that the cohesion that we've seen over the past year and years will continue in all the right ways.
Slava Ukraini!
More than 200 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers have returned home in a prisoner exchange. Russia's defense ministry said 106 Russian soldiers were released as part of the agreement with Ukraine. Around 100 Ukrainian prisoners were also allowed to leave. Officials say some of the Ukrainian soldiers have severe injuries and illnesses. Meanwhile, the freed Russians were being flown on military transport planes back to Moscow for medical treatment and rehabilitation.
Сьогодні хороша новина від нашої команди, що займається обмінами. Вдалося повернути додому ще 100 захисників і захисниць, 80 чоловіків і 20 жінок. Це армійці, прикордонники, воїни військово-морських сил, нацгвардійці. Серед них, до речі, оборонці Азовсталі. Це сотня родин, які перед Пасхою отримали справжню радість. І, звичайно, продовжуємо працювати, щоб повернути усіх наших з російської неволі. Пам'ятаємо про кожного і кожну. І повернемо.
Christian organization Samaritan's Purse is in Ukraine setting up warming shelters, shelters which are helping locals survive as the war with Russia rages on.
Samaritan's Purse is here in southeastern Ukraine and indeed all across the country, setting up warming centers like the one you see behind me. They are essential to the ability of the Ukrainians to be able to survive and thrive throughout the course of a difficult winter. The heat, the electricity, the light, the availability of internet and television news are all essential. The Ukrainians actually call places like this points of invincibility because it represents to them the resilience that is required to continue to move forward and to survive and to thrive in the midst of these very difficult circumstances that have been put forward. These centers are places where people can congregate, where they can stay warm, they can have access to news, they can have a hot cup of coffee, they can get a hot meal if they need, even a bed if necessary for the night. We have children that come here in order to ensure that they're able to continue attending school remotely and have electricity and internet. They can survive through bombings in the shelter, and they can ensure that they and their families are safe. This is just one of the many ways in which Samaritan's Purse is supporting needful individuals all across Ukraine in the name of Jesus. We thank you for your support and urge you to continue to pray for Ukraine and the people who are in crisis here.
Civil unrest in France continued as many French residents are angry that the Macron government wants to increase the retirement age from 62 to 64. The protests, which have occurred nationwide, have continued unabated since January of this year. Riot police were called in as thousands took to the streets setting fires and calling for French President Emmanuel Macron's resignation. France has one of the lowest retirement ages for an industrialized country and spends more than most nations on pensions, which it amounts to around 14% of economic output. The government says rising life expectancies have left the system in a very precarious situation. One man was killed and 3 others were injured at a shooting outside of a funeral home in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday afternoon. Police say the gunfire broke out about 20 minutes after the funeral ended, and they believe the victims were targeted.
There was a funeral being held at the funeral home behind me. The funeral had just let out around 12:17 p.m. A member of the Metropolitan Police Department was in the area very close to where you guys are standing, called out for the sounds of gunshots that had occurred in the area. Our member went to the aid of several people. So far, there were 4 individuals who were shot. These 4 people, ultimately one of those persons, a male, adult male, is deceased. In total, there were 4 adults who were struck by gunfire. At this point, the Metropolitan Police Department is asking for the community's help. We're asking for anyone who has information to please call us anonymously. At this point, it appears that several of the people who were in the block were specifically targeted. We're unsure why that is. We're unsure why these people were targeted, more or less why they were targeted at a funeral. We don't understand that. We're looking for the community's help.
It was on this day that French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte is banished to the island of Elba off the coast of Italy. One of the first Nazi concentration camps is liberated after the Second World War, and Apollo 13 blasts off from Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is Today in History for April the 11th.
April 11th, 1951. During the Korean War, President Harry Truman relieves General Douglas MacArthur of his command in Asia.
General MacArthur is one of our greatest military commanders, but the cause of world peace is much more important than any individual.
MacArthur, who had challenged Truman's war policy, later gives his farewell speech before Congress.
Old soldiers never die. They just fade away.
1814. Napoleon Bonaparte abdicates as France's emperor. He's banished to the island of Elba off the coast of Italy. That's where Napoleon remains for the next 9 months until he mounts a brief return to power the following year. 1945. During World War II, American soldiers in Germany liberate Buchenwald, one of the first Nazi concentration camps. 1979. Idi Amin is deposed as Uganda's president as rebels and exiles backed by Tanzanian forces seize control in the African country. And 1970. Apollo 13 blasts off from Cape Canaveral, Florida, on NASA's 3rd manned mission to the moon. But that mission is later cut short when an explosion cripples the spacecraft. Apollo 13's crew manages to return safely to Earth. Today in History, April 11th. Tim McGuire, The Associated Press.
Well, it was another beautiful day in Lethbridge, but a little bit windy, and the warm spring-like conditions will be sticking around. A full look at the weather picture is coming up. We enjoyed lots of sunshine and warm temperatures across much of southwestern Alberta again today. Tonight, it'll be partly cloudy with a low near -1 in Lethbridge. Wednesday, sunshine mixed with cloud and a high of 9 degrees. Mainly cloudy on Thursday with the mercury dropping to 8 degrees. Pretty much the same picture on Friday. Clouds with sunshine and a high of 8. A nice weekend is shaping up so far. Expect loads of sunshine and a high of 13 on Saturday. Sunny and 20 degrees for Sunday. Monday, just a few clouds will roll back in, but we should still see a high of 17. Now, the average high for this time of year is 12 degrees with an average low of -2. The record high was 22 degrees set back in 1943, and the record low was a very chilly -26 set back in 1940. The sun rose at 6:47 and set at 8:18. Looking at the national forecast for Wednesday now, there should be lots of sunshine and a high of 10 degrees for Victoria, just a few clouds and a high of 10 as well for Vancouver. Clearing in Edmonton with a high of 9, a mixture of sun and cloud and 8 degrees for Calgary. Mainly cloudy and 9 degrees for Regina. A 30% chance of showers developing and a high of 10 for Saskatoon on Wednesday. It'll be mainly sunny and a high of 16 in Winnipeg. Now in the central part of the country, expect a clear sky and 23 degrees in Toronto, a slight chance of showers and 21 for Ottawa, overcast and only 12 degrees for Montreal. In Atlantic Canada, rain and 10 is on tap for Fredericton, showers and 7 degrees for Halifax, light showers and 5 for Charlottetown, and in St. John's, Newfoundland, Expect rain off and on and a high of 6 degrees on Wednesday.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
The International Monetary Fund downgraded its outlook for the global economy from 2.9 to 2.8% growth. The downgrade comes in the face of high inflation, rising interest rates, along with uncertainties resulting from the collapse of 2 American banks. The IMF, a leading organization for 190 countries, is forecasting 7% global inflation this year. That is up from its January forecast of 6.6%. Economists say the situation remains fragile and that downside risks predominate. Swiss company Glencore has modified its hostile takeover for Vancouver-based Teck Resources. The revised offer includes an overall cash component worth $8.2 billion US. Teck shareholders would also receive 24% of the combined metals company and the cash. Teck rejected Glencore's initial unsolicited takeover offer in favor of its own plan that would see it split up its metal and coal businesses into 2 separate companies. Now, just as we've been discussing a doctor shortage here in Canada, physicians in Britain may be walking off the job. The 4-day walkout by tens of thousands of doctors with the National Health Service is set to begin tomorrow. It could result in the postponement of up to 350,000 appointments. Officials with the NHS Confederation say it'll be impossible for the health service to address its huge backlog while meeting high levels of demand. The doctors' union says it has asked for a 35% pay increase to bring junior doctor pay back to 2008 levels. The country's health secretary, Steve Barclay, says that demand is unrealistic. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 146 points on the day to finish at 20,421. The Dow was up 98 points to 33,684. The S&P 500 was down just under a point today to 4108, and the Nasdaq was down 52 points on the day to finish at 12,031. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.73 to $81.47 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 5 cents to $2.22 US. Gold was up a cent to $2,362 US an ounce, and silver was even at $25.06 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.57 per bushel, barley is at $9.16, canola is at $17.35, and corn is at $10.67 per bushel. Live cattle were up 93 cents to $172.30. Feeder cattle were up $1.18 to $202.10. Lean hogs were down 33 cents to $73.05, and the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to $74.25 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, the National Citizens-Led Inquiry into the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic will open 3 days of hearings in Winnipeg on Thursday. Some of the expert witnesses will include a geneticist and an epidemiologist, a medical microbiologist, and an Edmonton police officer. The hearings will then move to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan from April 20th through the 22nd, and Red Deer, Alberta from April 26th through the 28th. Now, will the investigation launched by the Alberta Ethics Commissioner impact Premier Daniel Smith and the UCP as we head into next month's provincial election? Political reporter Brian Lilly will share his thoughts next. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Enjoy a fun evening with your spouse at Mark Gunger's Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage event taking place May 12th and 13th at Miss City Church in Lethbridge. Through his hilarious humor, Mark Gunger shares the difference in men and women's thinking and ways that couples can come to understand each other and build strong marriages. Tickets are $45 and can be purchased online. Visit Miss City Church Facebook page for the link. Do you have a heart to serve our community? Streets Alive Mission is looking for volunteers to help make sandwiches, sort incoming donations, assist with Foot Friday, and many other opportunities to serve, receive training, and to provide support for this important cause of bringing hope to the hopeless. Visit streetsalive.ca to fill out their volunteer application or call 403-320-1159. And that's today's Bridge City News community calendar.
The Alberta election is around 6 weeks away, and now Premier Danielle Smith is under an ethics investigation over chats with Calgary street preacher Arthur Pawlowski about his charges stemming from COVID-19 restrictions. That includes the time he spent at the Coutts border blockade. Will this investigation hurt Danielle Smith and the UCP as we head to the polls next month? To chat about this in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly, who joins us once again from Toronto. So Brian, you're a longtime political watcher. Will this ethics violation hurt the UCP's chances of being re-elected on May 29th?
It's going to be really interesting to watch because let's be honest about what this election comes down to. Who wins Calgary? And you've got at least 3 UCP incumbents not running in Calgary itself. So, look, the UCP is going to win smaller centers. They're going to win in rural areas. The NDP is going to do well in Edmonton, and then it becomes battleground Calgary. So does this ethics investigation just wash off her back? We've seen that with the Trudeau government and their multiple ethics violations, and voters reward them, although with smaller, percentage of the popular vote and fewer seats. So that has to be a concern. Prime Minister Trudeau got reelected while admitting to wearing blackface more times than he can say. But Justin Trudeau is a rare beast, and so that may not be the best comparison for Danielle Smith. The big question for Smith and the UCP is, how does this hurt them in Calgary? Does it motivate voters who were on the fence? Does it motivate the NDP base to turn out for Rachel Notley? If that happens, then it hurts her. But the counter to that is that Danielle Smith and the UCP have to make sure that they win battleground Calgary by whatever means possible. So they've got to find something to counter any negativity from this narrative around the ethics investigation, and they've got to make sure they get out their vote.
Yeah, what's really interesting is some of the latest polls had the UCP and NDP virtually tied in popularity at 35 points each and undecided at 22%. So we'll see if this ethics investigation will potentially sway some of the undecided voters. Brian, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe has joined Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, tweeting about how the federal government is trying to take natural resources rights away from provinces. Now, could this actually happen?
Well, it's interesting to watch. So I first saw Scott Moe tweet about this, then Danielle Smith retweeted him, and both of them saying the same thing, that they don't want Justice Minister David Lametti to say that he's going to be looking into whether they can take natural resources rights away from provinces. This started at a meeting of the Assembly of First Nations where Justice Minister Lametti was speaking. And the first person up was to raise this issue that I heard was a chief from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, north of about 2 hours north of Saskatoon, an area with lots of natural resources. And the chief was saying that he wanted the Natural Resources Transfer Act repealed. That's the act in 1930 that granted Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia the same rights to natural resources that the other provinces had since the British North America Act came into being, or shortly thereafter, actually. So, then it was a chief from Ontario saying, you guys gave this away to the provinces. That's actually not historically accurate. Treaties existed prior to Confederation, and those would have been looked after by the provinces. Provinces have always looked after natural resources. Lametti's was either being foolish and saying that he would look into this, or he was playing to the crowd. He knows, and he admitted that it would be controversial to do this. Why he would say he would look into it when it's just going to rip apart national unity, rip up the Constitution, is beyond me. But this is a government that has tried to control natural resources through other means. So why not this? It would be an incredibly difficult thing to do. But I watched the video. Lametti said that directly. He'll look into this.
The Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, will testify before a Commons Committee at the end of the week on the allegations of China's election interference. Now, Brian, the motion that passed the House said she had to appear by April the 14th, and that's the day she will in fact appear. Will we find out any key details from this appearance?
A lot of it will depend on whether she wants to be open and honest. It'll depend on the questions that the MPs ask. If they ask her about things that are the purview of CSIS or RCMP intelligence files or the communication security establishment, if they're asking anything about that, she's probably just going to say she can't discuss that in an open public forum. If they ask her specifically, were you briefed on these allegations? When were you briefed? What did you tell the Prime Minister? Those types of questions she can ask, because even though some of that would be covered by the, I'm dating myself, it used to be called the Official Secrets Act, but covered by its the current legislation, because it has been reported publicly, she would be able to discuss those issues. When she found out, what she told the Prime Minister, what they did about it. That should be the focus, because that is why she was asked to testify. Widely believed that Katie Telford was the one that CSIS went to and said, we have some concerns about one or more of your candidates running in the 2019 election. So what did she know? When did she know it? When did she tell the PM? What did they do?
Now, Brian, many people believe that the Chinese election interference in Canada hit all parties and levels of government. So let me ask you something. Why would China be interested in the Alberta provincial election?
Alberta has a lot of natural resources. I mean, that's one reason for it. We've also seen across Western Canada in particular, less so in Ontario farmland communities, but in large parts of Western Canada, China trying to go in and buy up farmland. So they'd be looking for, on a very local level, which party would have policies that would allow them to get the natural resources they want, which party would have policies that allow them to buy up land. We've had provincial governments bring in land speculator taxes to try and keep out foreign buyers, be it Chinese in Toronto driving up home prices, Saudis and Chinese buyers who don't live in the country in Vancouver driving up home prices. Will there be something similar about buying up farmland? That would be of interest. But the other reason, and I've talked about this with intelligence officials, is China plays the long game. So they'll start at school trustee. They'll start at city councillor. Why? Because they know quite often these people move up. So they might start as a city councillor, then they run for provincial office, then they run for federal office. So there's many reasons that they'd be interested in, and they'll be interested in both parties. This isn't a slight on either the NDP or the UCP. This is how China operates. They will look for people that they believe they can influence either on domestic issues or on how Canada interacts with China.
Brian, there's been a war of words over the carbon tax and whether you'll get back more than you pay, as the government says, or pay more, as the parliamentary budget officer says. So let me ask you, who is right?
Parliamentary budget officer. The Trudeau government, as we discussed a bit last week, they calculate your rebate in a strange way. They decide, okay, well, the average Canadian drives 15,000 kilometers a year, and so that's what we'll base the rebate on. Well, if you're driving 40,000 kilometers a year, you're paying a lot more. If you've got a commute between cities, you're paying a lot more. You're not getting the rebate based on your usage. You're getting it based off an abstract average. So a downtown person like me who lives in Toronto, walks a lot of places, takes the subway, drives, but not every day. Well, then this sort of rebate benefits me. Guess what? I live in an area where people tend to vote Liberal. Not me, but a lot of my neighbors do. So it helps those people, but it hurts suburban parents. It hurts people living in small towns that are required to drive. And then on top of that, they don't give you the GST portion of your rebate. So the GST is charged on top of the carbon tax. So the parliamentary budget officer wisely says, well, this tax has a tax on top of it. That's costing people more, so you're paying more. The government refuses to look at that. So look, they've kind of admitted it, but then walked it back with Stephen Guilbeault's comments recently. The fact is, most Canadians are paying more, some of them a lot more. And if you're well off, well, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, they think you should always pay more, no matter how much of your income you're handing over to the government.
Brian, you recently blasted Galen Weston's big raise for leading both Loblaws and the company that owns Loblaws, George Weston Limited. He was apparently deemed to be underpaid compared to other food industry CEOs and received a $1.2 million a year salary increase. Now, you're not a big fan of the move. Can you explain why?
Look, it's his own company. He's a majority shareholder. It's a private company. They can do what they want. but this was a dumb move from a PR standpoint. Loblaws is the one company that everyone's beating up over price gouging. Jagmeet Singh is not alone in doing this. People are saying grocery prices are up, and it's because of gouging by big grocery companies. Look, there's three major grocers in Canada. You've got Sobeys, you've got Metro, you've got Loblaws, but then there's also Walmart and Costco. But Loblaws is taking the brunt of this. And in the middle of that, they decide to give Weston a $1.2 million raise. It reeks of being out of touch. The guy, there's a very good business case for saying the guy deserves the raise. Share price just about doubled, revenues up, profits up. So all of these are good things and indicative of him deserving the raise. But as I said, he's a major shareholder in the company. He's already gotten a massive raise because both his stock options and the shares he already owns, they went from $66 to, last I checked, it was over $125. So he's made more money. He didn't need to do this. The board should have, read the room and said, you know what, you probably deserve it, but let's hold off for now until things calm down. Or Weston himself should have said, you know what, I'm not going to take it. Thank you very much.
Now, speaking of a board, Brian, we just have some breaking news here that the board from the Trudeau Foundation and the CEO have resigned. Can you explain what happened here?
So they put out a statement on Tuesday saying that the politicization of the 2016 donation of $200,000 from a Chinese-Canadian businessman who has since been linked, according to some media reports, to attempts to influence the Trudeau government, that the donation may have been made with that intent in mind, that the pressure from all of that became too much. So the whole board, including Sarah Coyne, who's Justin Trudeau's sister, resigned en masse. And my big question that I wrote about on Tuesday, Hal, was, would we notice if they just disappeared? This is an organization that was founded by the federal government in 2002. We gave them $125 million for an endowment. Wow. That endowment now sits at $144 million. That's a lot of money. But what do they do with it? Well, the most recent charity filings that I found on the Canada Revenue Agency website shows that they gave out $2.4 million in scholarships and awards. But the office expenses were $2.4 million. How do you spend $2.4 million to give away $2.4 million? That's a poorly run organization. And the scholarship or the academic supports that they're giving, it's going to things that we would get anywhere. This was supposed to be something to rival the Rhodes Scholarship system. And I just don't see, based on what I'm reading on their website of what they're supporting, that we're getting value for our money. I don't think most Canadians would notice if the Trudeau Foundation just disappeared tomorrow.
Brian, you and I have chatted a bit about this before. Do you think we could potentially see an election maybe in the spring or summer? Or more importantly, do you think potentially that Jagmeet Singh would pull the plug on the coalition, which would maybe potentially bring us to the point of going to the polls?
Will we go to an election? It's always a possibility in a minority, and I'm never going to tell you absolutely not, because things can change so quickly. Back in the first minority that I covered back in 2005, they tried to bring down the Martin government, Martin Liberals, in the spring, and it failed. But by the time the fall came around and so much swirling around the government, they went down very quickly with the support of all the opposition parties. The NDP under Jack Layton got behind Stephen Harper and the Conservatives and said, you know what, we can't stand behind this government anymore. So maybe more information comes out about China's election interference. Maybe the economy continues to sputter. Maybe inflation continues to be out of control, and Jagmeet Singh finally says, you know what, this isn't a government that I can support anymore because it's not delivering for Canadians. That's what you would have to see happen. The Bloc will always decide one way or another what's best for them or what they think is best for Quebec. But Jagmeet Singh is the linchpin that's holding up this government right now, and he thinks he's getting value. I'm not sure why he thinks that. He's gotten a bit more spending in the budget for things like a dental program, but he's not getting the credit for it. His party is not benefiting from it, and it's not what he actually promised Canadians he would fight for.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.
On October 5th of 2022, the Alberta government announced that Alberta will be the first province to regulate psychedelic therapy. These new regulations just went into effect on January the 16th, but what exactly is it? What's it for and how is it used exactly? So here to give us some of these answers is Cami Tanner from the Herbal Apothecary in Lethbridge, Alberta. Cami, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, great to have you on today. Okay, so Cami, for those of us who don't know, first of all, what is psychedelic therapy and who would benefit from it?
So, psychedelic therapy is using things like psilocybin mushrooms to have a psychoactive experience and helping with treating mental health issues.
Okay, I have heard about this before, so now it's regulated for here in Alberta. So how is it administered? Is it literally like taking a psychedelic mushroom, or is it in a different way, a different form?
Yeah, that's exactly how it is. It's basically doing a trip, but you're doing it under the guidance of a licensed psychiatrist who is licensed to do regulated psychedelic therapy.
Okay, so it's used for mental health, mental illness even?
It is, yep.
Okay, so I've heard about people like going deep into South America and taking part in this in like some little hut. So you're telling me that people can do this now in Alberta. Is it done in a doctor's office? How? Tell me more.
So it will be done in a licensed facility. There are very heavy regulations right now. This is a brand new thing. So we're just kind of feeling our way through this, and things will change and regulations will update as this goes further on. But right now it has to be done in a licensed facility under a licensed professional.
Okay, so basically those are the rules. Can you tell us maybe more about the new rules regarding the use of this therapy that has just gone into effect January 16th?
Yeah, so it's not going to be like cannabis dispensaries where you're going to go out and buy magic mushrooms and go home and take them. That's not what this is intending for. This is for heavy mental illness therapy or treating things like PTSD, depression, anxiety that need to be done under the watch of somebody who's licensed to do this, because there's a lot of things that can come up and a lot of things that happen that need to have some guidance to go through these types of healings.
Okay, like a lot of people might think this is very bizarre. So tell me, how can a psychedelic trip suddenly cure your mental illness? It almost doesn't make sense.
So there was a lot of research being done in the 40s, 50s, and 60s using psychedelics. But the amazing thing about using psychedelics as opposed to pharmaceuticals, pharmaceuticals have their place, but it's more of a band-aid that's covering up things and just helping people to kind of get through their day and manage the day. But the psychedelics are actually going into the body, changing the neurotransmitters, and psilocybin essentially can reset or reboot the brain so that you can have a new way of thinking and changing your thought patterns.
That's interesting because, I remember being a teenager and like your parents kind of preach at you, don't ever try that because it does that, just that. It changes those neurotransmitters. And to us, that seemed very like a bad thing to do.
Well, that's why it's necessary to do it under a licensed professional, because they're going to help you change those routes, change those thought patterns in a healthy way.
How exactly?
So when you go through these psychoactive trips, you're going to confront some of these thoughts or thought patterns that you're having, and they can help you walk through to kind of change the way that we're perceiving things and seeing things in a new way, and rerouting the way that we're actually processing those memories or those thoughts.
So is it that the patient, in this case, takes this mushroom, is tripping, I guess, in a licensed facility? Is it almost like there's a psychiatrist there with them to talk them through it?
Yep, that's exactly what we're looking at now is having that psychiatrist within that therapy.
Okay. Have you seen these studies actually become, obviously there's success because the government has now regulated it. So are there any success stories? Do you know of any personally?
Yeah, there's huge success stories. I mean, you can look at Paul Stamets down in the US, who's the huge mycologist, and he's very vocal about his experience with his social anxiety disorders and stuttering. And he did a mushroom trip, and after one dose, he was basically cured. We know people here locally that are, so desperate for this new type of therapy. We've talked to some veterans who are severely suffering from PTSD and have gone decades through this trauma without success through counseling or medication, and gone through one experience with psychedelic mushrooms, and their quality of life has returned back to them.
Okay, so is there a cost to this? Is it private?
We can assume right now that it is going to be a private cost. But when you look at the way that things are now with traditional mental illness treatments, inpatient, outpatient, medication, psychologists, therapies, it can go into the tens of thousands of dollars a month. And usually that's out of pocket, where now we're looking at one psychedelic trip and you have the potential to be healed in that one-time session. So the cost is very, very low compared to traditional methods, even looking at loss of production or loss of time from having to leave your job for these therapies, and the cost on the economy that it takes to put those traditional methods out. So it's going to be very cost effective for a lot of patients.
Okay, so how does this stop the average person then from just going out and buying a bag of magic mushrooms and going camping with their, I mean, kids, when people are young, they have done this. And I mean,
Sure.
Are there long-term studies of people who have used drugs in the past and now they have no mental illness because they use these drugs? Or is it mostly that coupled with the psychiatrist that they're sitting there with?
There's always people that are going to go out and do this on their own, because I think they've done the research themselves and seen the case studies back, like I said, when they were doing it in the 40s and 50s, and going, yeah, there is merit to this, but we just don't have things in place. So they've gone out because it has worked for them, and they've needed those treatments. But I mean, with anything, people are going to do things on their own, but for the most part, it's better to have it done under regulations, because you're going to get the best possible outcome. So that's where this kind of medical treatment plays a part.
That's so interesting. This kind of changes that whole campaign, don't do drugs, kids. Right. So Cami, how does this change with what was already available for Canadians?
This is just going to be another huge tool in the mental illness toolbox, I guess you could say. A lot of people are just not having the best results with those traditional methods. And so we're really excited to be able to have this new tool to work with that studies are showing is working amazing.
Okay. Do you know how long the provincial government has been actually working on this?
It's a little unclear. I know we've been watching the Psychedelic Association of Canada, and they put together a very large memorandum for analysis of regulation, and they submitted that to the Minister of Health back in September of last year. So I think Alberta, it's amazing that they've seen the benefits of this, that they're jumping on board. I think everybody was surprised that Alberta was the first province out of all the provinces who could have chosen this. But we're very excited that Alberta is the first province, and that they see the benefit of it, and that they are moving forward to try and do something better than what hasn't been working before.
Is this some sort of a transformative moment in healthcare for Canadians? It almost sounds like it is.
I think a lot of people, when that announcement came out, were cheering. We're very excited.
Wow. Okay, so can you maybe describe the difference then between psychedelic therapy and psilocybin mushrooms, or are they the same thing?
It's the same thing. So psilocybin mushrooms are psychedelic. So the psilocybin is what is the chemical compound in the mushroom, and when we ingest that, the body turns it to psilocin, which is the psychoactive compound, which allows you to hallucinate and, you know, affects your senses and your way of thinking. So it is the exact same thing.
Okay, is this like all natural, or has this been like chemically sort of changed in a lab?
This is all natural. I mean, you can chemically produce it in a lab, but we are looking with our company Pharmacil to produce these mushrooms and grow them naturally in a very controlled environment. But that's the beautiful thing, is this is natural. It works harmoniously with the body and doesn't really affect long-term side effects like medications can.
Interesting. Okay, I was actually just going to get to your company Pharmacil when you mentioned it there. So yeah, so I understand you and your husband own Herbal Apothecary in Lethbridge, but you've now started this separate company, Pharmacil.
Yeah, I mean, we're big.
Is it basically to help?
Pharmacil, yeah. So we're big believers in plant medicine and healing the body through natural means. Medicine is great; it has its place, but we've seen the detriments and the downfalls to pharmaceuticals and long-term effects of people not being able to get off medications or lots of side effects. And so we actually started our application process back in November of 2021 and submitted our application early 2022. So we were well ahead of the game before we even knew that regulations were going to be coming out, because we believed so much in it and knew that this was going to be something that was really important to Canadians to help with their mental health.
Wow, that's so interesting that you've been looking at this for so long and been working on this for so long, and now here it is, and you didn't even know that Alberta would be regulating it.
No, not at all.
Wow. Okay, so what do you think is the motivation to use this new medical option? You're mentioning mental illness, but are we talking about, you mentioned PTSD, but could it cure a depression, anxiety, those types of things?
Yeah, that's what it's great for. And so we also have to remember that the regulations, it doesn't just include the psilocybin, but it's also LSD, ketamine, mescaline, and MDMA. So they all kind of play different parts within the brain and do certain things, but psilocybin, yes, for sure, is going to help with PTSD and a lot of stress and anxiety disorders, which it has been increasing, but ever since COVID-19, we have just seen mental illness kind of go off the charts. And so there are studies out there that shows that Canada is, I think it's ranked 3rd or 4th in the world for antidepressant users. So that just kind of shows the monumental amount of mental illness that is happening. We're in crisis mode, and we need other tools to help deal with this crisis.
Okay, so Cami, I know here in Lethbridge we have a lot of issues with opioids, but just out of curiosity, would these mushrooms be maybe an option for replacing opioid in some cases, or maybe even helping with the damage that opioids have possibly done?
Yeah, so this is not going to be a replacement for opioids. However, these psychedelic therapies can actually help with addiction recovery. They've shown a lot of promise in helping people with addictions to opioids.
Cami, are there possibly other uses outside of the realm of mental illness that this could be used for?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of people, when faced with end of life diseases like cancer, things like that, that are fearing death. They actually can take a psilocybin mushroom trip, and it brings a calmness and releases a lot of that anxiety when being faced with death in the end of their life. So it's a wonderful tool in a lot of different ways.
Okay, so it's more of a calming method mentally, not necessarily it's going to physically do anything.
Yeah, it helps them not be so afraid of death. Yeah.
So maybe let's switch away from the psychedelic mushroom therapy. And I know you have a lot of expertise with herbal options and remedies with Herbal Apothecary. So can you tell us what makes mushrooms in their various forms so beneficial?
Yeah, so we already grow a lot of functional medicinal mushrooms. It's funny because these mushrooms have been used for thousands of years as healing and as medicine. And we got away from them when pharmaceuticals came into play. And it just kind of showed, you can see how our health has deteriorated. And so getting back to a natural way is really quite amazing and really beneficial. And a lot of people are wanting to go back to a natural way because it actually heals the body. It doesn't just put that Band-Aid on, so to speak. And people are seeing a lot of changes within using medicinal mushrooms to problems that they're having.
Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, so lion's mane is a great one for brain health. There's been a lot of studies done with lion's mane mushroom that has actually on a lot of use of it that has reversed symptoms of Alzheimer and dementia. We have a lot of people that come in using reishi mushroom to help them with sleeping habits and stress and anxiety.
Wow.
So they all do really, really wonderful things. And, it's kind of funny, the old saying, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Right.
But we fixed it and now we're broken again. So
Wow, it's interesting how the world works. It looks like we are running out of time, Cami. Very fascinating topic, though. I've learned a lot from you, so I thank you for that. And thanks so much for coming on today.
yes, and thank you for having me. It's always great to share new knowledge.
Awesome. That was Cami Tammer from the Herbal Apothecary in Lethbridge, Alberta. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.